Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means, is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. federal court and Canadian superior courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me must be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence due to my typically gentle nature is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I've always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation must be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting.
Does code, when you compile it, will this always run sequentially? Or is there some other way that these values work that I don't understand? Like, say, for instance, let's say that I don't know if this is called a function or whatever. Like, so let's say that this function or whatever is called, and it's like, oh, well, the Steam personal name is IGG Games, so it's pirated equals 1. Or if this kind of pirate equals 1. But let's say that you were able to defeat this part where, like, you get Steam app ID and it doesn't equal this. Oh, but no, you would need something to set it to 0, right? You would have to do something to set it to 0. And there is no something equals 0, so never mind. Okay.
I see Destiny is continuing to try to provide some kind of commentary on the pirate software situation, despite not even confidently being able to call a function when looking at code, and literally not even being confident that code runs sequentially. Logic is executed in the same order it's written, top down, in code within every function call body. Unless you hack the binary after compilation and mess with the raw assembly instructions or equivalent runtime environment's machine code. In most languages, there's a function defined known as the entry point function. Like in C and C++, the common cross-platform entry point is typically called main, and the primary thread spawned for the process upon creation executes that function to start the program execution flow. From there, you can make function calls within that function and so on within those functions in a manner that can be nested deeply until certain restrictions are met within either your RAM capacity or OS limitations. You don't have to define the function bodies in the same order you use them, or follow extremely rigid ordering with how or when you use them necessarily. But unless you start spawning separate threads to run concurrently, there will always be only one flow of execution occurring within the process of your code that's running, and it will always run sequentially according to how it should, based on how the code is written. The only real exceptions would be really outlier cases where either your compiler is corrupted or something that causes it to compile the code incorrectly, or if your operating system is infected with a virus that injects itself into other processes and starts spawning additional threads to do stuff and or starts modifying the memory space of the execution environment of the process in real time to overwrite instructions the compiler built from your code. In the case Destiny was talking about specifically, it's really straightforward. The protection pirate software coded starts the game in a state assuming it's pirated. Unless a Steam API engine is detected and indicated as initialized successfully, the piracy check variable remains unchanged and immediately the game is considered pirated. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to be online, since the Steam API engine can be accessed in offline mode. After the general Steam API engine initialization check, the piracy flag variable is immediately set to false, meaning the game doesn't recognize itself as pirated. From there, it literally does 3 different checks related to the results of function calls acquiring values from the Steam API that was initialized, and if any of them equate to specific values, the game detects the environment as pirated again in the same kind of state as if the Steam API was never even initialized successfully to begin with. The 3 separate if statement blocks can technically be replaced with one if statement block where the condition checks for each statement being true or the other being true, ultimately setting the pirated flag variable to true if any one of them returns true. Technically, Pirate Software's code there is kind of messy and non-optimal because at the very least he's potentially wasting CPU resources due to not returning from the function body block immediately upon any of the conditions triggering the flag being met, although you can argue that's kind of nitpicking and ultimately doesn't really matter. I'm not sure if it's normal or not for Destiny to be trying to forcefully seem like an authority on topics it seems he's just trying to rather blatantly look for any little meme or something to probably use to weaponize his audience somehow through, or something like that. But it seems rather odd to me that he feels compelled to do that kind of thing currently. Certainly doesn't seem like a good faith tactic. But there's something he's recently said that I find much more interesting.
All the warnings were sent out on time, as I showed.
All right, link it. Where's the Iranian donation fund? I'm ready. I'm ready for it. I need these Israelis to get the fuck out of my media space. Get them out of here, okay? Get them the fuck out of here. Mike Sacco is not Israeli? He absolutely is. I don't know why you would not say that, but isn't he marrying with Israeli family? I don't know. I met him at dinner with him in Israel. I assumed he lived there. Does he not? Maybe he's just a Jew that lives in Israel and he doesn't have citizenship?
Parted for fun. And that's pretty much just it. Right.
I'm pretty sure if you're a Jew and you like fall asleep in Israel for more than 1 week, they sneak into your room and they swap out your passport for an Israeli one, so.
I found it exceptionally strange that Destiny explicitly said that Nuxnor lives in Israel and claimed that he even flew out to Israel to meet Nuxnor and had dinner with him in Israel.
Look, man, it has nothing to do with, let me explain something beautiful. Freedom of speech is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad and grateful to live in the United States of America, the best country on the planet, where I have freedom of speech, the ability to say what I want. And in this open marketplace of ideas, the greatest ideas will win. If the slop tubers are beating you, it means you're a retard. Every moment you are insulting a slop tuber, you are insulting the person that has out-idea'd you, okay? You are insulting the people that are standing on your nuts every day.
There are many instances of Nuxnor explicitly saying that he lives in the United States. I'm not sure what the truth is there. One of them's got to be lying. Maybe Destiny's really getting desperate to try to defend how he participated in trying to absolutely destroy my public image while conspiring against me knowingly with Lily, who I know he's friends with, and others from the Offline TV and Friends group. It seems Destiny sees Nuxnor with considerable contempt, mainly, it seems, for Nuxnor apparently being some massive grifter that has some kind of massive political bias inclined towards supporting Trump or something like that. I definitely feel like there must be something wrong with people who vaguely hate Nuxnor, especially if it seems like racially motivated hate, how Destiny expressed it. I've personally had bad experiences with Destiny. Meanwhile, I've heard Nuxnor has been accused of being a pedophile basically by people that seem much more likely to either be pedophiles themselves and or inherently biased in favor of supporting people who are actually pedophiles. Nuxnor himself clearly doesn't appear to support pedophilia at all, which really doesn't make much sense if he's a pedophile, as some accuse him of being. He also doesn't seem to have any real issue with me, nor seem particularly convinced that I'm guilty of insane things I'm clearly being accused of behind the scenes to attempt to discredit me. Same seems true for Pegasus. So I guess I should apologize to Nuxnor and Pegasus if they've been facing any difficulty from Destiny, because he obviously would have an issue with me recovering my reputation through this podcast, while he's most likely well aware that I clearly am currently substantially more inclined to favor slop tubers like them over Destiny if I had to take sides in a debate about reality. And for the record, I have absolutely no romantic and or sexual interest in and or involvement with either of them, nor have I ever, nor do I ever want to, nor do I see myself as at all particularly politically aligned with them either. That being said, I still question Pegasus for sure.
And it's always the usual suspects, you know? It's iDubbbz, Vitali, Jack Doherty, Hassan, Pokimane, Dream. It's all, look, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Bro, Hassan's been having a bad week. And this video is actually about me, but it's about how great I am. I mean, obviously, I don't know what you would expect. But, yeah, this is insane, man.
It's not over the top. It's not clickbait. What did I tell you guys? It's a future prediction. Pegasus is never wrong, okay? This is definitely not a cult, guys. It's not my fault, all right? It's not my fault I'm literally a fortune teller, all right? It's not my fault that I can literally see the future before it happens, all right? Now, keep in mind, I am a Scorpio, so obviously, that gives me special powers, right? So you gotta consider that, take that into the equation. But obviously, Asmongold is a big fan of the series. He's reacted to a bunch of videos, and I show up in his homepage a lot conveniently, right? So he's provided me with a lot of content, and I appreciate that. And he's Hassan's #1 op, so any enemy of Hassan is a friend of mine, I guess. I guess any Pegasus fan is a W automatically, all right? In fact, consider this: he's one of the biggest streamers in the entire world, and he's a Pegasus viewer. What did I ever lie, guys? It just seems that when you watch Pegasus videos, it's crazy. You just automatically start winning at life. You win at everything. Subscribe, guys. Holy shit, smash the like button. My God.
Being a Scorpio gives him some kind of magical powers? Lily's a Scorpio too, and I definitely see reason to suspect her of egregious divination abuse to target me maliciously, knowingly, as part of a conspiracy to murder me. So I still feel I'd need to see some kind of clear, explicit, direct support from Pegasus and Nuxanor towards me publicly before I'd feel more meaningful confidence that they aren't, at the very least, intentionally complacent and somehow involved themselves in attempting to erode at my existence and ultimately contribute to conspiracy and attempts to murder me for selfish gain entirely against my consent and to my detriment. I found it strange that the title Pegasus used for the video he mentions his perspective on his astrology sign in ends in number 65 for seemingly no apparent reason. The 65th release on this podcast is me exposing Jamie for being what was being called a pizza master. So perhaps Pegasus is trying to say he's exposing someone with that video for trying to have a similar effect on his life. I really don't know. Or maybe it's him flaunting trying to have that same kind of extremely harmful effect on my life himself as Jamie was trying to have. It sort of seems like the latter to me, to be honest. Quite disturbing and infuriating. It really doesn't help Pegasus to say, "This is not a cult, guys," while coming off like he's perhaps extremely deviously trying to intimidate me away from standing up against him, Nuxanor, Tectone, and others on YouTube if necessary, with their ongoing, clear, complete lack of actually objectively adequate care in relation to the circumstances I'm facing, as they show subtle signs of intentionally cooperating with Lily and other offline TV and Friends members behind the scenes, entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. With the connection between Nuxanor and Pegasus publicly seemingly only having grown stronger in more recent times, ever since I've come across both of them and explicitly mentioned them on this podcast, it also seems even more suspicious to me. But I suppose it's possible Pegasus is simply facing consequences beyond his control of Lily's divination abuse, so I'm still reserving judgment on all the slop tubers at this time. Speaking of Nuxanor, there's more I've seen from him that I feel I should address as well.
By the way, if you're against this movement, you're probably a retard. There are a few things in this world that are straight up retard detectors. One of them is saying that, yeah, we don't want the Epstein files. All right, that's a retard, okay? Listen, that's a retard. Another retard detector is, yeah, we want the government to be sending money to Zimbabwe for lesbian tap dance theory. Absolutely. That's another retard. Another retard is someone that says we want the ability to buy things and then for the company, for no reason, completely arbitrarily, to be able to take the thing that they sold us back. If you think that that is justified, you are a complete retard. Oh my God, you will own nothing and be happy. I will defend my multi-billion-dollar corporation.
As for the things Nuxanor considers detectors of you being seriously mentally handicapped, I most certainly have never advocated for any of those things. I have never been aggressively pushing for the release of the Epstein files, but I've also never been against them being released. I know I can't be on them since I've most certainly never been on his island nor ever been advising him. Even if Kimmy's somehow on them, it's not going to suddenly make me not want to be sexually intimate with her anymore. if anyone else is on them or not on them. I honestly don't even really know what that's supposed to mean to me at this point, anyways. Ultimately, there's probably so many people on it that I'd have to judge them based on individual merit rather than some huge list, anyways. At least that's what seems to make the most sense to me. I don't even know where wanting the government to send money to Zimbabwe for lesbian tap dance theory came from. Is that a meme? I most certainly have never supported that. I mean, I don't know the reasoning, so it's not like I'm particularly especially against it if there's some extremely complex political reason for it or something. But it's not like I've ever inherently supported it or currently see any good reason to. As for the stop killing games thing, I'm pretty indifferent about it. I don't know how valid it is to assert that not forcing the government to regulate video games like that is the start of a downward spiral into some kind of one world communist government or something crazy like that. But I also wouldn't do what Pirate Software did and say it's an absolutely horrible idea to even try to do what that movement was doing and to specifically actively oppose it. I mean, the petition or whatever wasn't even for North America, and it was pretty clear he misrepresented what it really stands for. So I definitely find it heavily questionable, at the very least, how Pirate Software handled the whole situation. But knowing how all these extremely fake streamers operate, who knows exactly how much of it all is just one huge staged garbage thing.
This is like, it's my favorite thing because qualifiers on YouTube are really powerful. Let me teach you something about YouTube, okay? I'm sure that a lot of you don't actually know this because you're not in this space. So I'm going to teach you something, okay? Let me go to Legal Eagle. All right, Legal Eagle is a law YouTube channel who is anti-Trump. That's his main personality point these days because that's basically all of his videos. But if you actually look at his videos, right? So it's all, you know, Trump shit, more and more Trump shit. All right. But if you look at his most popular videos, his actual claim to fame was lawyer reacts to Suits. Lawyer reacts to Better Call Saul. Lawyer reacts to Grey's Anatomy malpractice. Lawyer reacts to Better Call Saul. See, putting lawyer in the title is a qualification for views, okay? I'm not even gonna lie, it is a gigantic qualifier. Now, I mention this because if this would just be titled Reacting to Suits or Reacting to Better Call Saul, no one would care. Putting the word lawyer in the title absolutely gives you a qualifier to be able to make YouTube videos that will get you a lot of crazy views. And it's the same for someone like Dr. Mike, okay? Dr. Mike is a famous doctor on YouTube, okay? All right, famous doctor on YouTube, sure. If you go to his videos, and you go to his most popular videos, Real Doctor reacts to The Good Doctor. Real Doctor reacts to Grey's Anatomy, you know, stuff like that. So if he would just title the video, Reacting to Good Doctor or Reacting to Grey's Anatomy, obviously this would be a complete failure. It's because he has this qualifier of calling himself a doctor to do it. Now, let's say he wasn't a doctor. Let's say hypothetically he was not a doctor. Okay, this would be diabolical. This would be crazy. This would be insanity to constantly doing shit like this. Now, the specialist reacting genre is a massive genre, okay? Criminal reacts, all right? There are, you know, actual criminals that do reactions to things. Like, and for some reason, these get tons of views. Because everyone wants to see an ex-mob boss rate 12 mafia movies. No one cares about me rating 12 mafia movies. The reason why I mention this is because Thor over here, Mr. Pirate Software, he calls himself a game dev to give himself the proper amounts of credibility in order to make these content. All right, and if it turns out that his whole game development shit is a giant fraud, then essentially he built his entire YouTube channel and career on top of a lie. And in my opinion, that's the real reason he's a lol cow. That is really why he's falling apart. This is actually stolen valor. He's a game dev with no games. He worked at Blizzard, but he kind of worked at Blizzard as a fucking nobody instead of as actually somebody that made games. So by the fact that he uses this, he used it as a qualifier and as a springboard to jump off of, but realistically, it's a fraud, in my opinion. That is why I gave you this entire diatribe, right? He is a face with no chin. He is a testicle with no balls.
I agree with Nuxnor that it's a fraud if Pirate Software doesn't really have 20 plus years of coding and doing direct hands-on work with video game development, yet is talking basically like he does. I remain pretty neutral overall on my stance towards Pirate Software because I don't have strong evidence to suggest he's personally harmed me specifically with his being a fraud as such, but I do find it distasteful that he does appear to be a fraud to a non-trivial extent. I also don't agree with scamming people and promising them to release a game and then collecting the money, which I assume was a lot more than something like a few $100 or $1,000 or $2,000, and not having delivered it over 8 years later. But again, I don't know or particularly care about the details of what Pirate Software got himself into there, and nobody seems to actually want to talk about him being a literal financial scammer instead of just trying to make fun of him in some weird, pathetic manner that almost seems disingenuous to me in its fundamental intent behind it.
Imagine we have a car object, and I create the car object by passing in 96 for false false. Do you have any idea about what those numbers mean? How I'm initializing that car? You don't. A step above that, a better alternative would be to specify in words what 96 means. For example, unsigned 32-bit integer horsepower equals 96. Number of doors equals 4. Okay. Is automatic equals false. Is electric equals false. And then pass that into the construction of car. That is the bare minimum. That's what I would expect out of an intern.
Right.
That's fresh out of school.
Because that essentially, one of the most important things about coding is not just about getting it to operate the way you want it to, it's also writing it in an efficient way. Like, if there's no way this dude needs to rewrite all of these things for part types every single time. He'll need to copy this entire paragraph every single time.
Yes, Nuxnor is correct that one very important aspect of coding is not only getting your code to do what you want it to do, but also writing it in an efficient manner. But I guess I'll have to be the only one on the entire internet that isn't just trying to humiliate Pirate Software for easy clout. The main point that the Coding Jesus guy and now also Nuxnor have failed to properly take into account is that you're restricted by the API of the environment you're working within, and also that interfacing with APIs looks different depending on exactly what you're doing. It's disingenuous, especially if you're actually knowledgeable in coding, to try to throw broad strokes at what bad practice looks like through a few very limited examples that basically ignore the actual context of the typical API usage contexts. In the specific example there, even without ever having used game maker language myself, I can tell that they have some kind of particle API where you selectively define certain properties of particles on an as-needed basis after creating it. Now, the way particles typically work is you'd have various properties the particle engine is capable of utilizing, but depending on what kind of particle you're creating and what effect you want it to display visually, you'd actually only end up utilizing and perhaps modifying a selection of every property available. Additionally, there's absolutely no real standard for what values you might use for any of the particle property values. The reason why Pirate Software didn't do some terrible coding practice there is that he must have wanted different particles to have different qualities for specific uses, meaning it would make complete sense to do more function calls to specify additional properties for certain particles, whereas it wouldn't for others. Specifically for something like particles, it's ridiculous to expect a coder to painfully explicitly name some kind of descriptive variable for each quality of the particle individually when the reason why the numbers are statically typed in outright is probably because they're very specific values that Pirate Software would have chosen essentially based on his own feeling for how he wanted the particle effect to function. If you'd only use the value once and quickly referencing the API documentation for the function call would immediately reveal what the hard-coded value represents, it's a disingenuous argument to try to say the programmer is a bad programmer because they opted to hard-code it rather than painfully explicitly type out long variable names for each particle parameter. Basically, there probably wasn't any faster, easier, or meaningfully cleaner manner with which to code that snippet related to particles that was criticized there, particularly working within the GML API. But even in another API where the same properties are specified through a similar series of function calls to the interface supplying the functionality. But that's what happens when you get someone extremely clout hungry who feels the need to talk about reading 10 C++ books and doesn't even actually have video game development knowledge, trying to criticize video game development in a language they hardly have any knowledge about. And although I can appreciate Nuxenor making it evident to me that it's probably relevant, I elaborate on my perspective on it more in order to prove my own credentials. His evaluation on it wasn't very great either. But at least Nuxenor doesn't claim to be some quite experienced developer who's read 10 C++ books or whatever. I myself have substantial video game development knowledge using C++ and have used the Ogre 3D graphics API and can say confidently that even there, particles have various properties that you'd need to make multiple function calls to define specializations for, especially if you're not using some kind of configuration file for it. GameMaker might either not have particle configuration files as part of its API, or Pirate Software might have specifically just felt like hard coding them instead of using configuration files. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter in terms of development speed, since neither option would be substantially slower in terms of development time. Unless you want to claim Pirate Software has some kind of insane OCD where he feels obsessively compelled to reach some extremely oddly specific precision with every little value of every particle he uses, and that makes constantly recompiling versus using a particle configuration file slightly slower over thousands of recompilations for very slight changes over time, which I'm pretty sure there's no real evidence to suggest is the case. Overall, would I say Pirate Software's codebase seems to reflect that of someone with 20 plus years of programming and especially video game development experience who worked at Blizzard? No, definitely not. I'd expect someone like that to have either written their own library or set of libraries for video game related development in their language of choice themselves, or at least be using a more modern programming environment that doesn't depend on C-style function calls lacking inherent object-oriented design principle utilization to define game entities as part of its core high-level API. But I also recognize that that's starting to make me sound like the very people I disliked dealing with when I myself did video game streaming, since ultimately, if he's doing it for fun and it's fun in GameMaker for him, then there's perhaps no spectacular reason for him to use C++ or something else instead. Beyond that, things like his general poor design principle choices are definitely not what I'd expect from someone who's nearly as experienced as he claims to be, even just for being a programmer in general. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean those things are the reason his game isn't already complete. They probably contribute to at least some slowing of his development versus if he did things better, but not several years kind of slower. It's still very possible to write a very much functional, fun, playable, and complete game in GameMaker with mediocre coding practices like using flat arrays excessively and neglecting to use loops in absolutely every place where they'd be appropriate, and doing all that in a reasonable amount of time, perhaps only somewhat slower than doing everything in a more industry standard and generally experienced manner. I feel like the only real criticism anyone should be making of Pirate Software, from what Nuxenor described of the overall situation, is that Pirate Software seems to have actually explicitly entered into some kind of agreement where he publicly collected a non-trivial amount of donations from an audience and left them with him accepting an obligation to deliver a product after raising some kind of substantial amount of money he's obviously not refunded, while also not having delivered a product after 8+ years either. I'd have to agree with Nuxenor on that one, that it sounds straight up like a scam. So the real issue, I'd say, with Pirate Software isn't so much that he's complete garbage as a video game developer, but rather that he's just a straight up scammer who basically stole a bunch of money from people he lied he'd deliver a game to while he's messing around flexing his subscriber count and checking donations and reviewing and playing video games on stream instead of finishing his obligation first before doing all that. Again, how much he scammed, I don't know. Who exactly he scammed, I don't know. How exactly he got that money, I don't know. It's all stuff I'm not involved in at all and not particularly interested in finding out. But unless he's going to provide some kind of meaningful public explanation for it, he's clearly a scammer, unapologetically scamming, and that's the real reason he should be getting attacked. All those attacking him for his coding practices, instead of that, seem like they're just desperate for latching on to any drama they can instead of addressing real issues with real substance and motion. And I find it disappointing that Natsunori appears to fall into that category no less than Destiny. Anyways, quite unsurprisingly, Celine recently streamed and most certainly did not do anything even remotely approaching canceling Kimmy, Jamie, or anyone at all for that matter. She actually didn't say anything I'd consider particularly meaningful or insightful at all. It's not like I was ever particularly waiting for her to stream or release some kind of content to begin with, so I don't really feel like there's anything more to say there beyond the fact that clearly I've proven Celine was utterly disingenuous in ever even attempting to imply she had anything even resembling sincere romantic and or sexual desires towards me, at least as far as her public and private behavior is at all capable of revealing. I see absolutely zero real evidence to at all prove otherwise. And, of course, it's only suitable that I document irrefutable evidence from her recent stream she did after my last release.
There's no way it senses. There's definitely info somewhere that I am not seeing. Guys, right now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of addicted to Poke Rogue. I've just been playing it on the side. What does it mean when something is a prebiotic and a probiotic? How can you be simultaneously pre and pro? We have not beaten all of this. But... wait. All of it as in... Wait, Mania, are you talking about this game or Claire Obscure? Because I certainly have not beaten all of Claire Obscure. And I need to get back to that eventually. You know when you're just like not in this... When the routine falls apart, the routine crumbles and dismantles and completely disintegrates. Anyone else? Guys, I'm addicted to playing CS. Why is CS so fun? Hi, Kenji. Actually playing CS, okay? Actually playing CS. Dude, I realize I'm so absurd for opening cases because I don't even have like the spare money to be opening cases. Like, what am I doing? Be right back, guys. I have to exit out of VTube Studio. For some reason, the invites don't send if I have VTube Studio open because I think it invites him to VTube Studio. Well, what are VTubers supposed to do then?
Wait. It's in V2.
Huh? What are VTubers supposed to do then?
It's open in...
Oh. Why leave? Now I have to exit VTube Studio again. Honestly, yeah. Can't have nice things in America. Just so much robbery everywhere. I heard today's climb is really fun.
Is that?
Yeah.
Wait, which one are we on? What type?
Ascent 3.
Ascent
If you
2?
look at the top right, you can see. You started playing Clair Obscure a week ago. Are you having fun? Isn't it so good? I still have to finish that, but eventually. Ponies to start that. I don't know if he can hear me, but he needs to play Clair Obscure.
You haven't even finished it yet, so how can you tell me I need to do it? Aren't you deliberately not doing it?
No.
No, you could be playing it right now, but you're playing Peak.
Oh, there's no way I'm finishing Alien Isolation.
Oh yeah, you should finish that game.
Case in point, it seems she'd rather just passive-aggressively, underhandedly attempt to shift blame back and forth between her and Slightly Poetic for clearly both participating in attempting to bully, abuse, disrespect, and neglect me to literal death. No real accountability whatsoever in sight. Nothing even resembling any kind of respect and or decency towards me. No remorse whatsoever. Just excuses, what appears to be trying to get pity for herself by exposing some strange, likely spiritually related serious cognitive dissonance she appears to have faced very recently that she could have just very easily Googled to immediately find the answer for, and a generally extremely pretentious, unapologetically diabolical attitude towards me and this situation. But, again, knowing what kind of person she's shown herself to be to me with her attitude and behavior towards me up to this point, I wouldn't say I'm surprised at all. I've learned long ago to expect nothing better from massive scumbags like her and her friends. And for the record, it's not like I wanted her to be like that. But it is what it is, and I don't owe her and or anyone else anything for me to stay quiet about how messed up it is. Remember, her boyfriend, Slightly Poetic, explicitly directly emailed me to my personal Gmail address I lost access to shortly after calling him out for emailing me at not that long ago, and he basically told me to commit suicide. I literally screenshotted his entire exact email and showed it on a past release on this podcast. A public figure with over 13,000 followers took time out of their day to directly contact me to try to bully me into suicide. But I guess by legal mindset's standard, he's nothing and a nobody, with a following even smaller than someone like Sean DeBlack, so it's not worth any lawtuber's time or energy to defend my life in any capacity from literal criminals conspiring to murder me like Slightly Poetic. I guess they're maybe waiting until someone bigger like Kimmy, Jamie, Celine, Aria, Emaine, or someone else with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers directly contacts me and tries to bully me into suicide. Then maybe they'll care. Or maybe not, because there's a war between Israel and Palestine, Ukraine and Russia, and Ethan and Hassan. Talking about those conflicts will get them more clout, right? Anyways, further spiritual insights revealed multiple increasingly diabolical, more recent egregious violations of my energy by Jessica, which led me to check and figure out that she's recently streamed. I definitely have some things to say about that.
Jamie asked me to make a healthy cookie. So I'm making healthy cookies. Again, I don't know why my voice is not here. Yeah, coconut cookies are a bit healthier. What is wrong with my voice? Who's your guys' bias in Huntrix? Do I like Mellow Mellow? Not really. I think it's yummy, but it's not something I like really look for. I don't really like coconut that much. Hi Sharps, how are you? Rumi, me too. I literally am only making coconut cookies for Jamie and my friends because my friends really like coconut. Honestly, I have really deep talks with you guys. I think it's like what you said. I mean, I'll listen to BTS, but I don't fanboy the same way I would to girl groups, and BTS has majority girlfriends. Yeah. And what's even crazier is girl fans sexualize guy idols and celebrities so much more than a guy sexualizes a girl celebrity. Like, it's insane. Like, people don't get that it goes both ways, but I feel like because we're in such like a male dominated society, like people are threatened by that. Like, I think both sides have pros and cons. Yeah, like they're like showing up at BTS's house. Like, that's a stalker, but no one calls it a stalker. They're just like, oh, she's just a really hardcore fan. Like, no, she's a stalker. Can't see any male K-pop idol comment section on Insta or TikTok talking about my legs are wide open. No, literally, like, what happened to saying hello? What happened to saying hello? I've been saying that a lot lately because people just have so much audacity. And it's like, can we go back? What was I saying? Oh yeah, so my cousin recently got a girlfriend in LA. So he's been like visiting a lot and he's here for like a few weeks. So I'm having dinner with him. But I don't really have family here, so it's really nice. Ugh. If you guys can have one animal that's like not a domesticated animal as your pet, what would it be? What would I do? I think I would do a white tiger. I actually have a plushie. Of a white tiger. Can you let me eat, ma'am? This is my white tiger. I don't know why, I really liked white tigers since I was little, but I think it's because it's like a Korean, like, it's like a Korean animal, like a mascot. I'm doing alright, how are you? Do you guys always like just lie when someone asks, how are you? Because it's like, who? Like, are there people that say, oh, like, how are you? And then someone's like, oh, like, I'm like so terrible. And they start like rambling. I feel like I only say like I'm doing bad if like a really close friend asks and I'm like in the mood to talk about it. But you know. Yeah, I'm the same way. I just say like, oh, I'm okay. I'm not feeling my best today, but it's okay. I just say that. So I'm too lazy to like talk about it. But I know that if I say I'm bad, like they're gonna feel inclined to ask about it. So then I'm just like, okay, like, I'm just gonna not say anything. Everyone's getting married. When am I gonna get married? Do you guys have like an idea of when you want to get married? Like what age? Or do you even want to get married? I feel like ever since I was little, I always wanted to get married. Like when I was young, when someone would ask me what I want to be when I'm older, I'd be like, oh, I want to be a mom. But I feel like as I got older, like the idea of getting married and like having kids feels so far away. Like it doesn't feel like something that's like obtainable. And like everything's so expensive. Everything costs money. Breathing costs money. When you know you'll still have money post-marriage, yeah. Like a wedding costs so much money. I understand why people just like sign papers and that's it. Or like do like a courthouse wedding. I just have no hope for future. That sounded really depressing, but it's kind of true. I actually think it's so refreshing when a guy loves their girl. I'm like, when a couple really like loves each other, I'm just like, wow, you know, there's hope. Because I feel like in LA, there's a lot of instances where like people just date to date and like they don't even like make it official. They'll like have a situationship for like the longest time and like everyone's just like so obsessed with other things. Our generation is cooked. Like it just keeps getting pushed back. The bar is so low when a guy loves his girl. It really does matter because like when you love someone, you will literally do anything for them. It's true. And like that's not only with like a romantic partner. I feel like if you form friendships and like bonds that are like so strong, you would do anything for them. If you don't play pickleball or matcha, good luck finding someone on them. No, I swear, like the influx of pickleball players is solely because people want to like date and like meet each other, but there's no other way to meet each other. And like girls know that like tech bros love pickleball, so they just go to pickleball and then like they, I don't know. I've never heard of like a success story, but you know, there's ways. There's ways to find love. I also just like, I don't want my friends like dating a creator. Like I just hate how like the creator circle is so small and it's always the same people. Like, and I feel like I know so much about these people and not in the best way that it's like, it's just doomed. Like I really don't recommend like dating in this industry. I feel like people should always venture out and like date someone that's not in the circle, but everyone just dates everyone in the circle and it's like, and it never goes well and I'm just like, what did you guys expect, you know? These aren't genuine people, like they're creators. it's hard to find genuine creators. I don't think I've ever dated someone like super popular. Like I've never really like dated. And I don't know if it's because like my standards are like really high. But it's because like, I don't know, I just don't like it when people lose a sense of reality and like what's important. And I feel like a lot of people in LA just like kind of lose themselves. It's like really sad. But that's what makes them happy, so you can't really like judge them, you know? That's just their way of living. Is misophonia where like you can't stand when someone's chewing loud? That's me. Like it's like an actual thing. Like it drives me crazy when I hear someone going like, I'm like, I try so hard, but I get so annoyed. Like it's like I can't help it. It's actually so tilting. And I feel so bad because like sometimes like my friends will do that and I'm just like I try to like zone it out or tune it out and I can't. It's just so powerful. Did I get a new phone? I got it for IRL streaming. I'm actually gonna do an IRL stream with Celine and Janet on Monday. Very exciting news, I know. Yeah, I hate unnecessary sounds. I hate when people talk so much. I think I'm just a bitch. I don't think I have anything else. I think I'm just a bitch. Like, oh, when someone talks so much, I'm just like, please. I like when people talk with substance. But if you're just like talking to talk, I'm like, but maybe that's just their way of dealing with awkward silence.
So right away, literally within the first 2 minutes, Jessica mentions that Jamie asked her to make coconut cookies, specifically asking for something healthier than Jessica's made in the past. I have no idea about why Jamie specifically wanted something healthier, nor exactly the dynamic that's causing Jessica to feel the need to cook for Jamie practically on command, as if Jamie's some kind of boss or superior to her or something. Broadly, I'd say it serves as further irrefutable evidence that Jessica is fully knowingly and intentionally involved in ongoing sabotage and suppression of my life in a conspiracy to murder me that's happening as a result of ongoing egregious, entirely non-consensual violation of my energy by Jamie. More specifically, I don't know of any particular meaning to coconut cookies, nor coconuts in general, although it seems to be some kind of common theme with some kind of hidden meaning, given how Kimmy's recently made a tweet with selfies where the caption or actual text content of the tweet is literally just a coconut emoji. I doubt she'll delete it, and I don't care whether she does or doesn't, but I'm including a screenshot of it here either way as evidence. Jessica mentioned something called Huntrix and asked her audience about their bias in it. I'd never even heard of it before she mentioned it, and I don't see any reason I'd ever care to comment on me having any kind of particular bias towards it or anyone in it or involved in making it or somehow else related to it. At this point, I suspect Jessica is somehow exploiting narratives related to it in order to continue to have some kind of chokehold on my energy to attempt to justify ongoing suppression and sabotage of my existence, obviously entirely against my consent and to my detriment. I really don't know or care so much about K-pop idols and their social media comment sections, but clearly there's some parallel there that Jessica seems to see between that and her relevancy to my life somehow, from what I can tell. For the record, I've never wanted nor expected Jessica to throw herself at me, neither publicly nor privately, with some "my legs are wide open for you" kind of attitude. That would creep me out. I'll also never have that kind of attitude towards her. I've also never particularly cared for comparing Jessica, or anyone else either for that matter, to K-pop idols or their standards. It seems Jessica is so delusional when it comes to this situation that she seriously believes it's even remotely appropriate to extremely deviously constantly try to force me to have to give her attention to the point where she feels entitled to having me politely say hello to her in her Twitch chat or social media comment sections or something like that. As if I owe it to her to pretend to be on some kind of good terms with her and or generally validate egregious false narratives that somehow her active ongoing suppression and sabotage of my life that she's enabling and facilitating Kimmy and Jamie to utmost egregiously do, especially through Jessica, Celine, and Janet, is, ever has been, and or ever will be, even remotely objectively appropriate. I certainly largely blame Kimmy and Jamie for so egregiously defaming me publicly and privately so extremely deviously that it was ever even possible for Jessica to be at all left under that impression. But ultimately, it's also largely Jessica's responsibility, at least from my perspective, to not be an absolutely unhinged, selfish, arrogant, extremely narcissistic psychopath, knowingly enabling and facilitating ongoing attempts to have me murdered entirely unjustly, and to not also help Celine and Janet attack me entirely wrongly as a result, as well. I don't know who Jessica's cousin she talked about is. I also don't know who their girlfriend in LA is. But I find it perhaps worth mentioning that I'm very much not at all okay with it if Jessica's cousin has recently started dating Kimmy. I'm not okay with anyone dating Kimmy other than me. They're seriously not doing me any kind of favor if they are. They're just enabling and facilitating criminals conspiring against me to find excuses to continue to leave me in extremely detrimental and undesired life circumstances, while Kimmy keeps looking for excuses to justify endless disrespect and neglect towards me, entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. For the record, I've never told anyone anything about what kind of animal I'd have as a pet if I had to pick among non-domesticated animals. I also currently feel absolutely no need to share such a thing with anyone, neither publicly nor privately. Anyone ever at all even attempting to communicate otherwise to those facts has done so entirely against my consent. That being said, I've never had anything particularly against white tigers, but it seems somehow that Jessica liking them relates to how she's exploiting my energy through Kimmy. I mean, I'm pretty sure Jessica would be aware that's the kind of thing I end up thinking when someone I can see spiritually is egregiously violating my energy suddenly randomly decides to talk about plushies they have, yet she still felt compelled to say it. For the record, I do not and have never considered Jessica a really close friend to me. I currently consider her among my worst enemies. I haven't ever been looking for her to say or do anything to attempt to invite me to talk to her about how I'm feeling, and there's nothing she could say or do at this point with how things are that would ever really effectively function as something that would compel me to do something like talk in her Twitch chat to ask her how she's doing either. It's entirely irrelevant to me how she's actually doing or if she's in the mood to talk about it. As far as I can tell, she literally couldn't care less how I'm actually doing, nor about actually making me feel at all comfortable or in the mood to talk about it, and in fact, she's helping malicious bad faith actors conspire to murder me on top of that. I don't owe her any particular consideration of her feelings, nor any other part of her state of existence in general for that matter. I've never had any idea of any certain age I'd like to get married. Currently, I feel like marriage has some weird alternative meaning most people associate with it, perhaps even beyond the whole having children thing that I already know I absolutely unconditionally never want to do. If the only real point of marriage is to have kids with the person, then I most certainly never want to get married with anyone ever. I've literally never even once thought to myself that I want to be a parent. Literally never even once. And I'm quite certain that's never going to change. If we're talking about someone who completely, sincerely, fully respects my unrelenting, absolute unwillingness to ever tolerate having children with anyone for any reason, I still question why I really need to get married to them. Again, I consider marriage pretty cucked by the government, and I'd rather not get cucked by the government. I feel like the way marriage is set up, you actually would never end up marrying someone you actually really like. I feel like they'd want you to not feel like you should ever have to stress about losing half of everything you own upon divorce in some scenario where they might try to passively aggressively and or passive aggressively basically torment you with that prospect in order to try to force you to treat them however they want in the relationship. I understand everyone's relationship dynamics and what they look for in a partner is different, and my perspective might not make sense or it might be strange or something for a lot of people. That's fine, but I'm talking about for myself. I don't know or particularly care what thought process or dynamics Jessica has going on in romantic relationships. I honestly don't care about all of that when it comes to anyone except Kimmy. I don't see why I should have to. I'm not really interested in dating anyone else, nor having any kind of romantic and or sexual involvement with them. Again, if Kimmy seriously proves she'd rather end up incarcerated with a lengthy prison sentence and or physically deceased beyond capacity for resuscitation rather than take my connection with her seriously, then after one or both of those things happens, I might reconsider. But for now, my position is extremely firm and unwavering on this. Also, for the record, my position on marriage, children, relationships, and all that has never had anything to do with the potential cost of a marriage. I have absolutely no fixations on the cost or location of marriage if I were to get married. I've never said or done anything that should at all suggest otherwise to anyone either. I also don't consider whether or not I ever get married to be tied to my hope for a future, nor would I consider my life depressing either way, as long as I personally feel I'm in a fulfilling long-term, lasting life partnership with someone I personally like and feel extremely physically attracted to, like the kind of situation I've always wanted and been trying to work towards having with Kimmy. I extremely strongly disagree with Jessica's evaluation of love. You most certainly will not do absolutely anything for someone you love. If you're forced to have to do absolutely anything for someone, that's a trauma bond, or straight up being their slave, being deprived of basic human rights. If you actually love someone healthily and they love you back healthily, you would do nearly anything for each other within reasonable boundaries. By my extremely screwed up psychotic biological relatives and others from my past standards, I'm sure if you asked them and they were to answer honestly, I should have let them exploit me to literal death, and it's not loving that I have truly, absolutely unconditional unwillingness to ever commit suicide or get murdered so everyone can cover it up and pretend I wanted and or deserved it. But that's because they never at all actually loved me to begin with. They just tried to force an extremely abusive trauma bond onto me that also deprived me of my basic human rights. This clearly is a fact and not just my opinion, and there's absolutely nothing that could ever even possibly convince me otherwise at this point. I seriously couldn't care less if you're gonna give me some "that's not unconditional love" garbage. This is reality, not some childish fairy tale. No love is truly unconditional. If you seriously believe some seriously boundless, unconditional love exists, you either hate yourself or you haven't lived an actually difficult life at all, or both. Jessica talks about it being difficult to find genuine content creators and acting like she's defending her friends from dating content creators that aren't genuine. I can totally understand if she's protecting a lot of her other friends from a lot of fake content creators that certainly do exist out there. But Jessica most certainly is not protecting Kimmy from a fake content creator if she's trying to block me from Kimmy. She's actually just being extremely hateful and jealous, I'd say, towards both me and Kimmy at that point. Even if Kimmy's seemingly encouraging it, I can't help but feel like Jamie's probably trying to blackmail her behind the scenes, along with perhaps multiple others trying to negatively influence her to force herself to behave in a certain manner and or believe certain things that make her inclined to wrongly dislike me. And I'm clearly not forcing myself to feel like that, so it should be quite obvious that it's rather extremely disingenuous of anyone who attempts to frame me as at all disingenuous for having real integrity and actually caring what Kimmy really feels. There's absolutely no possibility of me even considering the possibility that I'm completely wrong about this without Kimmy even actually properly directly communicating with me about this whole thing. Her track record already proves she'll endlessly try to shift blame and deviously make me look like a massive fraud and a horrible monster if I don't force her to confront this reality and actually take a decisive position on this as well. So it's also extremely disingenuous if anyone's going to try to act like I'm abusive towards her in pressuring her to actually decide clearly and irrefutably and stick with that decision for real. She's mine forever, or she's going to end up in prison for a long time or dead after everything she's put me through. That's just how it is. It really doesn't make a difference to me whether or not Jessica's ever really dated anyone, whether super popular or not. Kimmy's technically never really dated anyone either, since a Grand Theft Auto boyfriend isn't an actual boyfriend. Kimmy's still never even once actually called Big Skanger her boyfriend as a boyfriend to Kimmy. It's always just Zakid and September. So it's all one huge roleplay fake act on top of the already to whatever extent fake act that Angel's Kimmy is over Kimmy's real personality. There's no swaying me with ultimately empty statements about having high standards and yapping about some people lose a sense of reality and what's important, or whatever. If anything, I feel like Kimmy showed me a lot more love than she ever showed Big Skanger. She let me stay in her Twitch chat as Angel's Shattered Wings for several months, where I'd literally attend every stream and type in chat frequently. She'd regularly read out my messages and respond directly in public. It wasn't a lot more than that, but it definitely made me feel special, and I definitely recognize and appreciate that she knew she'd make me feel like that. It definitely would have affected her life to do that, even if she doesn't really show it or pretends it's not a big deal to her. I was definitely the first and only that she ever allowed in her life like that. I honestly expected her to get mad and ban me from her channel when I first changed my username, but she was a lot warmer towards me about it than I ever thought she would be. I feel like whatever happened between September and Zakid and whatever attention Kimmy ever gave Big Skanger at any point in time pales drastically in comparison to what she shared with me all those years ago. And everything Kimmy did ever since, even after being banned from her stuff, well, let's just say Big Skanger certainly isn't in any position to ever dictate to Kimmy that she's his forever or she's going to end up in prison for a long time or dead. I remember that in a past release on this podcast, I explicitly addressed Jessica asking if her audience has any issue with those that chew with their mouth open. Now, suddenly, she randomly admits that she gets really irritated when people do it. It sounds like the more I'm speaking authentically about the reality of my life and how egregiously I've been defamed, disrespected, abused, and neglected, the more Jessica's getting exposed for being a fraud and substantially contributing to harm being inflicted on me entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. I find it strange that Jessica felt the need to suddenly get an entirely new phone just to IRL stream with Celine and Janet. I find it even more strange that she immediately followed that up with talking about hating when people talk a lot and basically admitting she thinks she's just mean and that's why. It's like she's straight up admitting that me exposing as much as I have on this podcast has forced her to expose herself for the dynamic she's had with her, Celine, and Janet conspiring to murder me, and now she secretly hates me for it. I obviously don't know the details behind the scenes about it, but I find the timing of it all a little too suspicious. There's nothing wrong with it if Jessica enjoys when people talk with substance in general, and I don't personally care whether or not I'm someone she includes in that group of those she likes hearing talk with substance. But even if she does feel like that about me, it won't ever change how I feel about her. I never saw any particular reason to believe she doesn't enjoy when people, even perhaps including myself, talk with real substance to what they're saying. Also, even if Kimmy doesn't explicitly admit it, I've never particularly seen any reason to believe Kimmy doesn't enjoy when I speak with substance either. I believe it's currently rather unclear how Kimmy feels about it exactly, but there's certainly reason to suspect she appreciates the depth of my rhetoric I've had since the beginning of my connection with her. Ultimately, regardless, I'll still want to rub up against her latex-clad butt for hours upon hours every day for all of eternity anyways, so whether or not she's willing to, and ultimately does end up doing so, is infinitely more important to me anyways. Overall, that stream Jessica did is seriously diabolical given the situation I'm in and Jessica's involvement in enabling and facilitating it. That's becoming only increasingly clear to me at this point. That kind of thing is exactly why I've addressed Jessica how I have in a past release, explicitly stating that I have absolutely no desire and or willingness to at all entertain any kind of at all consensual, romantic and or sexual involvement between me and Jessica ever. Jessica's recent behavior is perhaps the epitome of evidence proving how I've been getting egregiously diabolically set up and framed all this time to make me seem like an extremely pathetic, complete fraud. She's literally everything I should not have to deal with right now and should not at all be willing to tolerate any kind of at all consensual, romantic, and or sexual involvement with ever. Not only is she not particularly exceptionally physically attractive to me in any aspect compared to the average reasonably attractive Korean woman, but she's also clearly extremely tied to clearly diabolical conspiring against me being done by Kimmy and Jamie that's actively ongoing in attempts to utterly discredit me and frame me as this extremely pathetic, complete fraud, massive loser, stalker, creep. As if I somehow secretly did and or should have expected and or wanted Kimmy to explicitly show desire for children and general inclinations to be a very traditionally feminine woman in the kitchen type of person. As if I was always in need to desperately have to appease some random pretty girl on the internet that fits some kind of description of someone I say I'd be inclined to be attracted to, while having absolutely zero real emotional connection with them, while they have absolutely zero actually visible inclination to be even remotely actually decent and respectful towards me, while having to constantly appease them in some kind of extremely vague hope of some kind of pathetic compensation in pursuit of some kind of ulterior motive that massively compromises my integrity. The plots against me seem to only be getting increasingly clear to me. Kimmy and Jamie knowingly conspired against me with Chloe Chan Kin to extremely viciously, brutally steal from me every bit they thought they could as long as they could. They sought to utterly discredit me as ever being at all worthy of any real respect, recognition, love, trust, dignity, and anything and everything else they ever thought they could try to destiny swap with me for, clearly, fully consciously, and intentionally, entirely against my consent and to my detriment. They even knowingly helped my biological relatives try to destroy my life and convince the world I deserved to be treated like absolute subhuman filth by everyone, terrorized and tormented beyond belief nonstop for nearly a decade, and then murdered. If they failed to then somehow harm me into permanent silence about it, in order for them to cover it all up permanently, they hoped to leave me with constant fear for my life forever, as if I deserve it for supposedly being some absolutely horrible, diabolical demon worthy of Arya's energy, constantly trying to get me murdered because of me supposedly being. Jessica fits into this because she was the pawn in their game, trying to justify this massive grift and attempting to endlessly perpetuate inflicting it upon me. To try to cover up even their attempts to ever do what they were trying to do to me entirely unjustly and non-consensually. To attempt to falsify plausible deniability that they weren't actually absolutely diabolically, unbelievably egregiously exerting absolutely unconditional, unrestrained, malicious intent towards me all along from the very beginning. They tried to leave me with being trapped into seeing no other viable options in life than to be constantly, extremely, pathetically, desperately appeasing Jessica and effectively enabling and facilitating her to continue to attempt to endlessly siphon my energy through the egregiously, criminally abusive framework Kimmy and Jamie attempted to unbelievably, diabolically, narcissistically lay down to permanently lock me into some extremely detrimental trauma bond with them and their associates and everyone from my past forever, entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. I'd also like to address several other things. This past Thursday, this was left randomly beside my things. I don't know who left it with my things or why, because it must have intentionally been placed there either while I walked away briefly, like to use the washroom, or wasn't paying attention. It was extremely sneakily left behind my stuff, completely out of sight from the angle I'd normally observe my things at from a glance, so I didn't notice it until the building I was in was closing and I had to pack my things up. I don't know exactly how long it was left there, but whoever left it there clearly didn't intend on taking it back. As far as I'll ever be concerned, it was definitely placed there maliciously to attempt to frame me for something. I obviously don't want or need it at all. Absolutely nobody ever had any even remotely adequate reason to believe otherwise. I left it in the donation bin because I don't know where else to put it. It was either that or the trash. For the record, I don't at all identify with having a yellow aura. The kind and or color of any kind of clothing I wear has absolutely no secret significance intended at all, and it's never been intended to at any point in the past either. There's never been any particular significance to any of it. I just don't have money to buy anything else, even if I see reason to suspect what little clothing I have is somehow being exploited to attempt to falsify evidence for false narratives about me that are being perpetuated in reality entirely against my consent and to my detriment. Any pictures and or videos being taken of me are being taken entirely against my consent. I'm unable to control what stalkers might be doing in public while they sneak around trying to frame me entirely against my consent. That should have been evident already. The only places I ever post any pictures and or videos of me are my official social medias, including and listed on my podcast's official YouTube channel. After that fabric softener was strangely left beside my things, Kristen suddenly showed up and blatantly started stalking me in person. Spending the night around the same government building I frequently sleep around, he was also present last night, and I've noticed him around again already as well. It makes me feel deeply uncomfortable and unsafe, although he's clearly not trying to blatantly act intimidating towards me. But of all the places he could be homeless, he's specifically hanging around where I am all of a sudden, increasingly consistently and frequently, and extremely deviously trying to provoke me to lash out at him by nonchalantly pretending like he doesn't know me or something. Spiritually, I'm hearing Chloe sent Kristen to attempt to continue to violate my boundaries and siphon my energy entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. Apology not accepted. Access denied. Permission denied. I will never at all consent to allowing either of them back into my life. And I'm hearing Kristen was supposed to actually approach me and practically beg for me to forgive Chloe. Instead, he's just disturbing my peace, effectively, blatantly, unapologetically, full-on stalking me in person, and I'm absolutely certain he hasn't actually come around to try to get me to forgive Chloe. I'm sure he knows in reality that I'd be beyond stupid to ever even consider such a thing. He's trying to set me up and frame me for something, violating my energy entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment, and perhaps generally trying to make me look like my reaction to it is some kind of indication of me being a bad sibling or a bad person or something like that. He's actually avoiding speaking to me entirely. He's trying so hard to make it seem like he's not stalking me that I've yet to even catch him looking at me. Not only is Chloe a massive coward and extremely arrogant to know so extremely clearly how honest I'm being about everything that she doesn't even dare to attempt to approach me in person, but she's clearly exposing how egregiously she's been exploiting my extremely abusive and toxic biological relatives, that I'm having Kristen's literal stalking worked into some kind of situation of Chloe begging me for forgiveness and trying to make me look like a bad person for not being willing to validate it at all. Although I didn't witness it, I imagine Kristen was most likely the one that left that fabric softener beside my things, and my reaction clearly being so extremely distressed about all these strange things happening around me should prove all those from my past are all massive frauds and actually diabolical scumbag subhuman filth that were actually always nothing but horridly abusive towards me entirely unjustly. Related to further, more heavily spiritual insights, I don't know of me having any number one fan for me to ever be able to suspect them of actually being a hater that secretly despises me but copies everything that I do. I consider myself to only have haters or people that just don't care about me at all. For reasons unclear to me, I've been led to suspect that false narratives otherwise appear to be related to Pokimane. Perhaps Lily pretends to be Imane's biggest fan but is secretly a massive hater? I really don't know. The same energy is telling me that a Scorpio in my life thinks about confessing what they did to me all the time but isn't brave enough. So it might be referring to Pegasus, but I'd suspect it's probably much more so Lily. Maybe being pushed by Emaine. But Lily's clearly too much of a coward and probably somehow has too much leverage on Emaine for Emaine to be able to really pressure her. Pegasus is probably so cucked by both Lily and Emaine that he doesn't even realize how badly he's going to end up getting absolutely destroyed by Emaine if he doesn't stop sucking up to both of them desperately, pathetically, probably in hopes that he'll somehow be able to avoid some kind of backlash from Hassan for some kind of secretly being on good terms with him. The same energy was also going on about something about Masons trying to intimidate me to stay quiet and literally threatening to murder me. I didn't get this far to be intimidated by some weird, vague spiritual message where you're all too cowardly to even approach me in person and actually give me any kind of meaningful incentive to shut up. I didn't shut up with hitmen after hitmen coming after me to this day and celebrities conspiring to murder me right out in the open on the internet. You want to vaguely threaten me with spirituality when my life's in even more danger if I stay silent? Actually delusional. If that's some kind of indication that Hobson's actually the one behind the criminal impersonation Twitter account at Shattered Pasta, then all I gotta say is you shouldn't have messed with me like that and we could have been cool. You could have just moved on with your life or had the balls to straight up tell me to take down the remix as soon as you felt bothered and I would have respected that. I ended up taking it down long ago anyways because it wasn't all that funny of a troll to begin with and I never even did it to be funny. Get that ego in check because I'm not the one that needs to. Alternatively, it could also be suggesting Lily and or Emaine being responsible for the criminal impersonation account. I suppose it seems very possible. Pretty sure Pegasus isn't behind it. Someone calling themselves an ex-friend to me, operating from what I can only really suspect has heavily to do with Arya's murderous energy towards me, is supposedly trying to apologize to me while recognizing they shouldn't have jumped on the bandwagon of hating me. I'm really beyond caring. I'm not accepting apologies from anyone from my past. I'm focused on my future and the much more important individuals I should be focused on dealing with, not massive fraud, scumbag, nobody losers that to this day are trying to keep me stuck in extremely life-threatening deprivation for their own selfish gain, fully consciously and intentionally, entirely against my consent and to my detriment. It's crazy that the same energy is calling itself an entire witch's coven and trying to apologize for ever coming against me and saying it wouldn't have if it knew I have high spiritual ranking. Pathetic. And also calling itself a lover and explicitly literally saying they wish I'd drop off the face of the earth. So disgusting and disingenuous. Really shows me the reality of Chloe's energy and the energy of the Jamie, Lily, Arya trio, still to this day trying to send the murderous white heart emoji entity after me on Chloe's behalf through immense help from Kimmy. The same energy is also calling itself an awakened emperor and talking about I shouldn't worry and they're on their way to me now. Literally sounds like that energy is increasingly blatantly, unapologetically trying to extremely egregiously, diabolically pervert the reality of its connection with me in order to attempt to send hitmen after me while acting like it's some kind of consensual, desired, deserved romantic gesture or something really weird and creepy like that. For the record, I'm not buying it that Arya, Lily, and Jamie are actually just now awakened to the reality of who I am either. At this point, I'm quite convinced that they conspired against me through Chloe's energy so egregiously diabolically that they already knew quite clearly what they were really doing long ago. An energy operating from a similar energy, if not the exact same more or less, is also identifying as a separate, dark, and demonic coven, and talking about they want my gifts and are fully prepared to do whatever it takes to get them, and explicitly, ominously, and diabolically saying anything, as in very much sending hitmen after me constantly and trying to murder me to cover up what they're doing, is fully on the table for what they're willing to do. So maybe the Jamie, Lily, Arya energy is trying to mix with the Jessica, Celine, Janet energy to try to confuse people on being supposedly awakened and supposedly having good intentions, while also unapologetically exerting absolutely unconditional, unrestrained, malicious intent towards me. I don't know who might be trying to operate from an energy stealing my branding and calling themselves an ex-boss and supposedly apologizing twice that they didn't come to me one-on-one and address the situation before recklessly just firing me. What good do they think that does for me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't even know who they are, and some weird, pathetic, utterly useless, spiritual-only apology is garbage to me. Utterly useless. Apology not accepted. I don't ever accept anyone's apology that's only spiritual at this point. Doesn't matter who it is. I'm hearing some more utterly unhinged, psychotic, delusional garbage about a crazy baby mama, which again is literally impossible since I've never had sexual activities with anyone that even possibly could have resulted in pregnancy. Talking about having tracking devices on my phone and my car. Again, I don't have a car. Maybe someone John Saudet got pregnant has tracking devices on his stuff? I wouldn't be surprised. It's talking about me always being with an ugly slut. Literally impossible. I spend practically all my time around government buildings having 24/7 surveillance, and I don't have anyone I actually hang out with at all or am frequently around. That massive fraud, absolute psycho, stalker energy is talking about having many secret recordings that I don't know anything about, and that I will not make a fool out of them, and they're going to make sure of it. Actual lunatic that belongs in a psych ward. Perhaps worth mentioning was that I specifically also heard it was targeted only at males. So maybe it was related to some weird confusion the energy had about my gender identity. I mean, I've never actually revealed my gender identity to anyone I've ever had sex with. Of the handful of escorts that comprise the totality of everyone I've ever had sex with in my entire life, I never told any of those women much of anything about my personal life, and certainly not something like me being transgendered. I imagine most likely none of them ever even really suspected it during the times you could ever really say they were actually in my life at all. Heard some weird stuff that might be Celine energy calling me an ex, possibly also expressing serious confusion about my gender identity and how it might relate to me ever expressing any kind of warmth towards her, and admitting she feels she made a big mistake letting me go and saying she misses me. Hell no, I'm not giving Celine another chance while seeing absolutely zero real evidence she's actually changed to any meaningful extent in any manner, and wouldn't literally just do the exact same thing and make an even bigger mockery of me this time. She needs to completely let go of any delusion she might have otherwise, because it's seriously not happening. Those circumstances were different. Kimmy was endlessly finding excuses to try to block me from standing up for myself publicly and seeming even remotely dignified and justified in doing so. I've shut all that insane abuse down now, and I'm never going to tolerate anyone even trying to put me in that kind of position ever again. Literally, no matter what. That being said, what appears to be the same energy is calling themselves a higher up somewhere and trying to be comforting that I'm apparently not alone and they know what's been done to me and they're gonna help me and is on the way. Weird. I mean, I guess Celine maybe doesn't really have an option, otherwise she looks absolutely insane and unbelievably diabolical and demonic. Maybe it's an energy of Celine, Janet, and Jessica together? That would be really diabolical if you consider the kind of strange and only increasingly incriminating stuff Jessica's been saying that only really gives me an even harder time than I've already been dealing with, and still showing absolutely zero real prospects of actually helping me or showing me any meaningful or even remotely adequate respect and decency. Something operating from Lily energy was talking about the last person I kissed and saying they'll never forget the last kiss we shared and that it was hands down the hottest kiss they've ever had. Well, I've definitely never kissed Lily. I've never kissed any of the offline TV and Friends people in my entire life. The last person I kissed was the last escort I was sexually intimate with years ago. It was alright, I guess, but it was really brief, basically just a little peck on the lips. Nothing particularly special to me, and certainly not something super passionate I'd ever in any amount of lifetimes believe was the hottest kiss she's ever had that she'll never forget. It's really a weird and gross energy, at least from my perspective. Also literally calling itself Jesus Christ and talking about being proud of my faith, loyalty, and ability to stand up against the face of adversity and saying it loves me so much, while operating from some place of ridiculously heavily relying on the energy of some random escort I slept with only a handful of times and haven't seen or even spoken to or heard from for years and have absolutely zero desire to ever at all involve myself with ever again, who's egregiously lying that we shared some super passionate kiss that was actually probably among the most mediocre of kisses we've both ever had with anyone in our entire lives? Really weird and really gross. Extremely perverted sense of love going on in that energy. Extremely perverted. I'm again hearing about my very first love saying the same thing about supposedly thinking of me all the time and never having forgotten me. I never mentioned Kathy Long the first time as some kind of invitation for her to start obsessing over me and trying to spiritually and or otherwise stalk me and give me even more difficulty and attention I never wanted from her. And if it's talking about Kimmy, then I couldn't care less about just hearing about Kimmy's supposed feelings for me spiritually. I want actual, clear, discernible, irrefutable action and results in the physical world. Direct communication, meeting up with me, sexual intimacy in person, deep talks in private just between us, not weird, vague spiritual things that go nowhere meaningful. I'm hearing about Tate Energy perhaps operating from a place of stealing credit for my branding and efforts therein to some extent, exposing Mary Aslan for lying to me about whom my father is and it not being who I think it is, and apparently apologizing because she supposedly did it to protect me. So I guess more reason for me to suspect that Mary's an extremely disgusting, incestuous freak that actually had me as a result of getting pregnant with her brother, John Sade. I'm honestly beyond the point of caring anymore anyways. That whole family is trying to force me to care so much about their stupid dramas and trying to break my heart and all this garbage, but really, I just want them to leave me the hell alone. That same energy was identifying as a babysitter or daycare worker and talking about having absolutely no business whatsoever watching anyone's children at any time, blatantly admitting they pretend to love and adore them, but that the truth is that they actually despise them and that they see children as so whiny and needy and pathetic and that they literally make that energy sick. Certainly sounds like how I feel the reality of Mary's personality is. Nobody should ever even consider allowing her to take care of their children. She will terrorize and traumatize them and possibly sexually violate them. The same energy was also identifying as an Aquarius and saying that now that people are starting to see them correctly, they realize they're going to have to start treating me better because they're all watching. Telling me to be prepared for her to start sucking up to me. Pathetic. I'm not preparing for any such thing because I'm seriously, absolutely, unconditionally unwilling to allow Mary back into my life. Ever again. At all. There's no amount of sucking up to me that she and or anyone else could ever do. I don't know if Mary's an Aquarius, but if she is, that might explain why I was seeing that sign strangely showing up in various readings I was seeing. Never in an at all pleasant, decent, desirable manner. Just extremely obnoxious, pretentious, fake, and disturbing my peace. Entirely detrimental and entirely against my consent. Even more from that same energy was literally calling itself God and trying to criticize me for not acting upon what it's supposedly instructed for me to do, telling me the time is now and I must move with quickness, telling me I'm already behind and to stop stalling and stop procrastinating, telling me I know what I'm supposed to do and aggressively trying to force me to do it. That subhuman filth, Mary, seriously seems to unapologetically be behaving as if I should have to let myself get murdered or commit suicide so she and everyone else can act like I deserved all the nightmares she put me through and that she convinced so many others to put me through while literally trying to play God in my life. My response is kill yourself, Mary Aslan. You deserve death for this kind of attitude. Truly, I despise you. You sicken me. You are not my mother. You are an absolutely diabolical demon. I'm seeing Tate energy also communicating something from someone calling themselves my biological father and asking for forgiveness for not being around and saying he did the best he could. I mean, I'm really not trying to hold some huge vendetta against whoever it is. I just want them out of my energy completely so I can move on with my life. Is John Sade in the Epstein files? I couldn't care less about him being exposed if he is, for the record. Even more from Tate Energy was talking about Dixon paying tons of money to many male energies over the years to stalk and harass me. Too many questionable things to even count on top of that, were the exact words used. They also mentioned something about making me the beneficiary of millions they supposedly have after their death and trusting me to do great things, but I'm uninterested in accepting any money from him. Whether it's some kind of trust document from Dixon, or if for some reason Tate is talking about trying to give me money or something. I'm not interested. If I want money, I'll get it from someone I don't feel is so exceedingly shady with strange ties to my biological relatives. I want all of completely out of my life permanently, absolutely, unconditionally. There's some weird energy operating from what I can perhaps only really describe as the reality of Chloe Chan Kin's energy that she's been trying to hide behind Celine's energy, but is no longer able to. It's talking about being a corrupt sheriff and expressing rather blatant and aggressive frustration that the stalking I'm experiencing is supposed to scare me as they expose their resulting confusion, that it doesn't have the kind of effect they hoped. There might actually be corrupt law enforcement that's been operating, taking Chloe's word, and targeting me as a result and getting aggravated that they're unable to keep me silent and suppressed to cover up the mistakes they made in how they dealt with me. There was something weird operating from Kimmy's energy, talking about a reality TV star, saying I've been lied to my whole life and that's why I don't really know them personally, claiming they know me because we're related. So weird. Maybe Kimmy knows something about that. She's definitely hiding it from me if she does. I don't know who it is at all. I also don't particularly care, because I'd pick a happy, healthy, sincere relationship of the kind I've been saying I want with Kimmy over getting to know some reality TV star any day, even if I'm related to them. Being biologically related somehow really doesn't make me any more inclined to want to get to know them, especially after all my past experiences with all the biological relatives I actually have at all dealt with up to now in my life. What appears to possibly be the same energy was also identifying as a corrupt judge and straight up admitting they're the reason that someone else was granted a false power of attorney over an inheritance or money that was left to me. They apparently were in on it and knew exactly what was going on. I mean, Kimmy must have known what's going on, but I'm pretty sure she hasn't been going around lying that I'm Korean or somehow a close biological relative of some kind of hers. What Middle Eastern reality TV star is claiming we're biologically related and has probable ability to act as a corrupt judge, to give power of attorney over me to someone else falsely to steal money from me? It sounds absolutely diabolical. I saw suggestions in my energy that Kristen might have been approaching me with intents to give me a lot of money if I promised to stop speaking up online about what's happened to me. Maybe that someone else biologically related to me that knows they're an enemy is lying that they've already done so or are planning to do so. No, I'm not doing it. I've already said this and I mean it. I'm not accepting any bribes to shut up. Never. Get the hell out of my energy with that garbage. I even see reason to suspect that Chloe Chan Kin might be spiritually trying to egregiously divination abuse to try to get access to me as if she's an actual member of that family in order to try to claim she's bribed me or going to bribe me, as if there's any even remotely adequate reason anyone actually has to believe she'd do it or that I'd ever accept it. It's all complete lies, no matter who is claiming it, especially if it's Chloe. Suggestions that the energy trying to bribe me is actually different from Kristen were also present. Kristen's energy was describing him as being undercover while egregiously violating my energy because he's too much of a coward to actually live his truth during the day. Apparently, he pretends to be straight with a wife or would-be wife and kids or would-be kids during the day, but at night he loves dick. I mean, he's literally told me long ago in the past that he's sucked dick before and didn't find it terribly unpleasant. And I also know he's a massive coward and a fraud in general in how he lives his life. I don't want to deal with that. I want him completely out of my energy. I don't want anything to do with his wife or kids or whoever would be those. He's wasting my time and being extremely toxic. And for the record, at this point, I see reason to suspect him to have a secret life as a male escort in some capacity. There was something about a righteous official being almost ready to present me with some kind of job opportunity. I'm uninterested in working for the FBI or CIA or police or government. No thank you. At the very least, first fix your corruption that makes me want to sue both the Canadian and United States government, and then even think of trying to offer me a job. Otherwise, stay out of my energy. I'm serious. You're wasting both our time. For the record, the same energy blatantly admitted to being jealous and copying and stealing my content for a very long time, as well as taking it a step further by telling everyone that they're the original creator of my work and that I've been stealing it from them. What kind of goddamn righteous official is that? It's a corrupt as hell official that's egregiously stealing my work to falsify evidence that they're righteous. How the hell is this still happening? The same energy is also identifying as a pregnant woman on top of that, saying she's been lying to everyone about her drug use. She apparently promised that she would stop using months ago, but she hasn't because she just can't. She wants them even more now that she's pregnant. The same energy is also being called a psycho mother-in-law and saying she couldn't have me marrying their child because she knows who I am, saying I'm gifted and she knew that, blatantly explicitly admitting that she knew I'd eventually wake others up to the fact that she's evil, so she lied about me in order to break me and her child apart. Huh? If this is referring to Vivian Taudet, I myself was the one that pushed Vivian away and denied ever validating the fraudulent marriage John Taudet tried to force onto me with Vivian. Why the hell is Vivian's mom trying to somehow take credit for it now after admitting to trying to sabotage me by trying to force us to come together? So strange.